Imagine making a promise to God in a moment of despair, without measuring the consequences. Now imagine that this promise involves someone you love more than anything. That is exactly what happened to Jephthah, a man rejected by his own family, but who eventually became a powerful leader in Israel. When he found himself facing a great battle, he made a vow to the Lord. He promised to offer as a sacrifice whoever was the first to leave his house when he returned victorious. He won the war, but the price of that victory was higher than he could have imagined. The one who came out to meet him was his own daughter. How could a father deal with such a terrible decision? Would he have the courage to fulfill his word? This is one of the most impactful and controversial stories in the Bible, filled with faith, sacrifice, and an outcome that still sparks debates to this day. The story of Jephthah unfolded during one of the most turbulent periods for Israel. The people were living through difficult times, surrounded by relentless enemies who sought their destruction. This time the threat came from the Ammonites, a cruel people thirsty for war. The nation cried out for a leader who could protect them and guide them to victory. But who would take on such a great responsibility? Among the Israelites, there was a man named Jephthah. He was strong, fearless, and a born warrior. However, his origin was a heavy burden. Jephthah was not seen as a legitimate heir because his mother was a prostitute. Because of this, since childhood, he suffered rejection within his own home. His half-brothers, legitimate sons of Gilead, never accepted him as part of the family and made sure to keep him on the margins. The tension grew until the situation became unsustainable. His brothers decided to expel him from home, making it clear that he would have no right to anything. "You will inherit nothing from our father," they said with contempt. With no choice, Jephthah left for a distant land called Tob. He lost everything: the home where he grew up, contact with his family, and the little he still possessed. He could have given in to bitterness, resentment, or despair, but he did not. In Tob, he found other men who had also been rejected by society. They were fugitives, misfits, without hope and without a purpose. But Jephthah was different. His courage and natural leadership turned that group of outcasts into an army. Over time, he shaped strong and disciplined warriors, ready for any battle. As the years passed, Jephthah's name began to spread. He became a respected leader, a feared warrior, and a skilled strategist. He knew how to fight like few others and commanded his men with mastery. His group, formed by men who had once been rejected, was now a feared army, known for its strength and discipline. They operated as mercenaries, offering their services for battles and territorial protection in exchange for great rewards. While Jephthah was building his reputation far from his homeland, the situation in Gilead was becoming more and more critical. The danger increased with each passing day. The Ammonites, relentless enemies, were devastating the region. They plundered villages, destroyed crops, and terrorized the people. Fear spread, and the army of Israel was in ruins. Without a strong leader to guide them, there was no hope of resistance. Amid the desperation, the elders of Gilead gathered. They needed, at any cost, a courageous and experienced leader. But who? No warrior in the region had the strength or intelligence necessary to face the Ammonites. Then an unexpected name emerged in the conversation: Jephthah. For a moment, silence dominated the meeting. Jephthah, the man they had despised and expelled, the son of a prostitute rejected by his own brothers. Some hesitated, unable to accept the idea. But the truth was undeniable. Jephthah was the greatest warrior Gilead had ever had. More than a relentless fighter, he had become a natural commander, leading an army of men prepared for war. If there was anyone capable of defeating the Ammonites, it was him. Swallowing their pride, the elders realized they had no other choice. To save Gilead, they would have to seek help from the very one they had once rejected. So they gathered a group of leaders and set out for the land of Tob, where Jephthah lived. Jephthah was in his stronghold, surrounded by his warriors, when he saw a group of men approaching. Even from a distance, he recognized those faces. They were the leaders of Gilead, the same ones who, many years ago, had despised him and allowed him to be cast out of his home. What did they want now? The elders wasted no time with formalities. They knew there was no room for pride at that moment. "Jephthah, we need you. The Ammonites are devastating our land. and we have no one strong enough to face them. We have come to ask you to return and take command of the army of Israel." Jephthah crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes. The irony of the situation was evident. After so many years, those who had rejected him were now begging for his help. With a tone of disdain, he replied, "So you finally come looking for me? Were you not the ones who hated me and cast me out of my father's house? And now, because you are in trouble, you come to me?" The elders looked at each other, embarrassed. They knew Jephthah was right. They had treated him as an outcast, but now they needed him more than ever. Swallowing his pride, one of them stepped forward. "Yes, we cast you out, but now we recognize your strength. We want you not only to lead our army, but also to rule over Gilead after the victory." The proposal was bold. They were not only offering military command, they were promising Jephthah a permanent position of leadership. He would not only be a warrior, but also the ruler of the entire region. Jephthah considered the offer. It was a unique opportunity, but he knew those people well. He understood that if he did not secure his position, they could discard him just as easily as they had called him back. Therefore, he decided to impose a clear condition. "If I agree to return and God grants me victory over the Ammonites, will I be your leader forever?" The elders did not hesitate. They answered firmly, "The Lord is our witness. We will keep our word." With this commitment sealed, Jephthah accepted the call. He returned to Gilead and was officially recognized as commander and leader. The man who had once been rejected was now the only hope for his people. Before heading into battle, Jephthah did not rely solely on his strength or his experience as a warrior. He knew that victory would not come only from good strategies or brave soldiers, but from the hand of God. Therefore, before the people of Gilead, he raised a sincere prayer, asking for guidance and strength for the imminent battle. The confrontation against the Ammonites was inevitable. But before the first strike was delivered, Jephthah made a decision that would change his life forever. A solemn vow before God, a commitment that would cost him an unimaginable price. The army of Israel was in position. The warriors held their weapons firmly, ready to defend their land and their freedom. But Jephthah knew that battles were not won merely by sharp swords or bravery on the battlefield. He needed to be certain that God was with him. Looking at the enemy army, he felt the crushing weight of responsibility. If he failed, his people would be massacred and enslaved. He could not allow that to happen. He needed a sign, a divine guarantee. Then, filled with a mixture of faith and desperation, Jephthah stepped away from the battlefield, lifted his eyes to the heavens, and made a bold promise. "Lord, if you deliver the Ammonites into my hands, when I return victorious, the first person to come out of my house to greet me will be given to you as a sacrifice." Judges 11:30 and 31. With this vow, Jephthah sealed his commitment to God. He was willing to give up anything to secure victory. But at that moment he did not consider the consequences. Who would be the first to leave his house? A servant? An animal? He had no idea. He only knew that no matter what happened, he would keep his word. With a steadfast heart and unwavering faith, Jephthah gathered his warriors and marched into battle. The battlefield quickly turned into a scene of chaos. The clash of swords and spears echoed through the air, shields shattered under the impact of blows, and war cries filled the atmosphere. Jephthah was not fighting alone. The Lord was by his side. As the battle progressed, the Ammonites began to weaken. The army of Israel, once disorganized and fearful, now advanced with strength and determination. The enemies fell one by one, and the cities that had been taken were restored to the hands of the Israelites. The victory was absolute. The enemy army, which once saw itself as invincible, was completely defeated. The terror that loomed over Israel dissipated, giving way to euphoria and gratitude. The people celebrated the triumph, and Jephthah was hailed as a true hero. The one who had once been rejected was now acclaimed as the deliverer of his nation. But behind the acclaim and festivities, Jephthah carried a burden that no one else could see. His heart was restless. He had made a vow to the Lord, and he had yet to fulfill it. He tried to push the thoughts aside, enjoying the moment of glory, but as he neared home, a deep unease took hold of his chest. Something inside him whispered that the worst was yet to come. Then, as he entered the city, what he feared the most happened. Dancing with joy, beating tambourines, and with a radiant smile on her face, his daughter ran to welcome him. She was his only daughter. For her, this was a moment of celebration. Her father had returned safe and victorious, a true hero. Without any idea of the tragedy unfolding in Jephthah's heart, she was the first to leave the house to embrace him. In that instant, Jephthah's soul shattered. The joy of victory evaporated, giving way to overwhelming despair. He felt the terrible weight of his reckless promise. What had he done? A deep anguish overtook him. Unable to contain his sorrow, Jephthah tore his clothes, the most intense expression of lament in those times, and cried out, "Ah, my daughter, you have brought me great sorrow. I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." Judges 11:35. He knew that his promise could not be broken. For Jephthah, a word given before God was sacred. But the price of that commitment was higher than he could have ever imagined. Anyone would have expected his daughter to fall into despair, to cry or to beg for her life. But surprisingly, she did none of that. There were no screams, no revolt, not a single tear of plea. Instead, she lifted her eyes to her father, filled with courage and serenity, and said, "My father, if you have made a vow to the Lord, fulfill it, for it was he who granted you victory over the Ammonites." Judges 11:36. Her words were a shock. Faced with the sentence that sealed her fate, she did not hesitate. She showed more faith and obedience than many warriors of that time. She accepted her destiny without fear, demonstrating a heart fully surrendered to God. But before her father fulfilled his promise, she made a single request. "I ask only one thing. Let me go to the mountains for 2 months to weep for my virginity with my friends." Judges 11:37. She did not mourn only her imminent death, but also the fact that she would never marry, never have children. In Israelite culture, not leaving descendants was one of the greatest sorrows, as it meant the end of the family lineage, something considered a great loss. Jephthah, devastated, consented. For 2 months, his daughter wandered the mountains with her friends, mourning not only her interrupted life, but also the fact that she would never have a family. It was a silent grief, a painful farewell to everything that could have been. And then, when the time came to an end, she returned. She did not try to flee. She did not seek to escape her father's vow. With unwavering faith, she presented herself to fulfill what had been promised. Jephthah, overcome with sorrow, honored his word. He dedicated his daughter to the service of God, consecrating her to live in the temple for the rest of her life, never marrying or having children. To this day, scholars debate whether Jephthah truly sacrificed her as a human offering, or if she was consecrated for sacred service and a life of celibacy. Regardless of interpretation, the impact was immense. Jephthah's daughter never left descendants, and her story was marked not only by the loss of her life, but also by the fact that her lineage ended with her. For generations, the women of Israel remembered her story and honored her annually, a tribute to the young woman who accepted her fate without hesitation, with unparalleled faith and obedience. The sorrow of this story was so intense that it was never forgotten by the people of Israel. From that day on, a custom was established among the Israelite women. Every year, young women would go up to the mountains to lament for Jephthah's daughter, remembering the sacrifice she made. Judges 11:39 and 40. But the lament was not only for her, it was also a symbol of the pain of a father who, driven by the urgency of war, made a rash vow and paid a tremendous price to keep it. Even so, Jephthah was not remembered only as a man of thoughtless decisions. He governed Israel for 6 years, leading with bravery and wisdom. His name was not lost in history as merely a military leader, but as someone who trusted in God and became an instrument of deliverance for his people. The proof of this is in the scriptures. Despite his mistakes, Jephthah is mentioned among the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, a recognition that despite his failures, he trusted in God and fulfilled his role in the redemption of Israel. Jephthah was a man of courage and determination. From a young age, he experienced rejection. Cast out of his father's house and deemed unworthy by his own brothers, he could have allowed bitterness to consume him. But he chose another path. Instead of surrendering to resentment, He used his strength and intelligence to become a respected leader. And when Israel needed a warrior to face the Ammonites, it was precisely those who had despised him who came seeking him as their last hope. He accepted the challenge, trusted in God for the battle, and emerged victorious. But in the midst of his faith, he made a mistake that would mark him forever. He made a vow without measuring its consequences. In his desperation to secure God's help, he promised to offer as a sacrifice the first person who came out of his house to greet him, and that vow changed his life irreversibly. When he returned victorious, he may have expected a servant, an animal, someone without great significance in his life. But it was his only daughter who ran to meet him, radiant with joy, celebrating her father's victory. What should have been a moment of glory turned into tragedy. Jephthah was devastated. Only then did he realize the gravity of what he had promised. His daughter, however, demonstrated extraordinary faith and obedience. She did not question, did not resist, did not try to flee. She accepted her fate with serenity, showing more trust in God than many warriors of that time. The story of Jephthah is a warning about the weight of words and the impact of rash decisions. But it is also a testimony of faith, courage, and submission to God's will, even in the face of the greatest sacrifices. This story teaches us a valuable lesson. Before making vows to God, we must think with wisdom and responsibility. God takes our words seriously, and often, in the heat of emotion, we make decisions without evaluating the consequences. Some choices are irreversible and may cost us more than we could ever imagine. Jephthah ruled Israel for 6 years and was remembered both for his bravery in battle and for the vow that marked his history. His daughter, whose name was not recorded in the scriptures, remained alive in the memory of the people. Her courage and obedience were honored for generations, and her story was never forgotten. As a memorial to what happened, the young women of Israel began to gather every year to lament Jephthah's daughter. This custom passed through generations, serving as a reminder of the danger of rash vows and the weight of faithfulness to God. The story of Jephthah invites us to reflect on the seriousness of our words and our relationship with God. How many times in moments of despair, pain, or need do we make promises to God without measuring the consequences? We say things like, "Lord, if you help me with this, I promise to do that." Or, "If I receive this blessing, I will never stop doing this or that." But do we really think before we speak? Are we truly prepared to fulfill our promises, even if they demand more from us than we imagined? This was exactly the mistake Jephthah made. In the heat of battle, overwhelmed by fear and the urgency of war, he made a rash vow. He tried to bargain with God, without considering that his words might come at an unbearably high price. This leads us to another great reflection. Do we sometimes try to make deals with God? Instead of simply trusting in the sovereign will of the Lord, do we seek to negotiate, as if God needed something in exchange to grant us blessings? But the truth is that God is not moved by bargains. He does not need our impulsive promises to act. He already has a perfect plan and fulfills his will regardless of what we offer. True faith does not try to trade something with God, but trusts in him, knowing that his purpose will always be the best, even if we cannot understand it at the moment. Jephthah had already been chosen by God to deliver Israel. The Lord was already with him, guiding his steps and guaranteeing victory. There was no need for a rash vow. However, by making a thoughtless promise, Jephthah placed upon himself a burden he never needed to carry. And this leads us to an important reflection. Do we even today try to act the same way? Do we only promise faithfulness to God when we want something in return? Is our faith strengthened only when there is something to gain? Or have we learned to trust in the Lord without setting conditions, knowing that his will is always the best? Another striking lesson from this story is the weight of vows made to God. Jephthah could have tried to go back on his word, justify his mistake, or seek a way out, but he did not. For him, a commitment before God was something sacred, and breaking it was not an option. He kept his word, even when it cost him what he loved most. This makes us reflect. When we make promises to God, are we truly willing to fulfill them, even if it costs us something precious? It is easy to make vows in moments of emotion, during a worship service, in a fervent prayer, or in times of crisis. But the real challenge comes afterward, when the time arrives to honor our words. Now I want to hear from you. Did you already know this story of Jephthah in the Bible? Write your opinion about this lesson in the comments. Take the opportunity to share this message with more people. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. May God bless your life.